The newly announced 30% on the European Union and Mexico set to go into effect on August 1st.
For Canada, we are only going to accept the best deal for Canada. That is very much informed.
Bypassing the U.S., Canada, and Mexico have forged a trade detour agreement, crafting a plan to sidestep American involvement. Headlines capture it succinctly. One bold move, three key figures: $120 billion in trade, 30% tariffs, and zero U.S. customs stops. Overnight, Canada's Mark Carney and Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum introduced the Northern Corridor, a rail and port network spanning from the Pacific to the Gulf, rerouting containers entirely around U.S. territory. Reuters estimates this 9,200 kilometers route will redirect steel coils, EV batteries, and soybeans, surpassing the value of Detroit's entire 2024 auto industry payroll. Trade experts caution that the U.S. customs revenue stream, roughly $4 billion annually, could vanish before the new 30% tariffs even kick in. This shift threatens fewer parts for U.S. factories, higher lumber prices at Home Depot, and a budget shortfall rivaling Nebraska's GDP. So, who's steering North America's trade now? The White House, or two neighbors who've engineered a bypass around it? Stay with us, as by the video's end, you'll understand how this single route could reshape every supply chain on the continent and determine whether your next vehicle comes from a U.S. lot. The Northern Corridor's math is a stark reality check. Earlier this month, President Trump pledged a broad tariff on steel and auto parts, set to begin in August, distinct from sector-specific duties. Canada and Mexico responded with action, not words, constructing a 4,400-mile rail and port corridor from Prince Rupert to Mazatlan, funded by a $3.3 billion private consortium. On the Pacific end, an 8 million container superport will emerge on Mexico's coast. U.S. records reveal that in the first 9 months of this fiscal year, Section 232 steel tariffs generated about $2.5 billion, significant, yet a mere 0.04% of federal revenue. If even a portion of cross-border trade shifts to this new route, that income disappears and downstream prices rise. Detroit's factories would face delays for Canadian steel, while Monterrey's battery plants could ship directly to Vancouver, bypassing Michigan's tolls. Each rerouted railcar widens the cost gap between U.S. prices and Canadian-Mexican production, undermining the White House's goals. Corridor proponents liken it to a Panama Canal on rails, claiming a one-day shipping reduction and tariff immunity could cut West Coast exporters' costs by up to 7%. For the U.S., this means lost revenue and diminished influence. The U.S. can inspect documents, but can't tax trains that never cross its borders. Industry insiders call it regulatory leakage. Freight flows to the easiest path until policies shift or factories relocate. A recent Auto Parts Association survey found 41% of suppliers eyeing moves to Canada or Mexico if tariff uncertainty persists into Q4. The Northern Corridor is less a detour than a barometer. The higher the tariffs, the more cargo shifts, and the more Midwestern communities feel the strain. Stay tuned. The first train rolls out before the tariff deadline, and its impact could reverberate to Capitol Hill. Canada and Mexico didn't act impulsively. They laid the groundwork years ago. In March 2020, Ottawa allocated $2.3 billion CAD from its National Trade Corridors Fund to revamp the Pacific Gateway, prioritizing Prince Rupert with new docks, rail upgrades, and expanded grain silos. The investment is paying off. The port now handles 23 million tons of cargo annually, with growth continuing. This summer, another $2.5 billion CAD is fueling terminal expansions, enabling double-stack rail speeds that move Asian imports through Saskatchewan overnight, reaching Chicago a day faster than routes to Seattle. Mexico is matching the effort. Last December, President Sheinbaum approved $1.6 billion to enhance 6 key ports: Veracruz, Altamira, Manzanillo, and others, while completing a toll-free Sonora-Durango superhighway. The public goal is capacity. The private aim is tariff avoidance. Manzanillo is at the forefront, with Reuters noting dredgers deepening basins and crews building docks to handle 10 million containers annually. doubling last year's volume. Naval engineers claim the infrastructure will be ready before Trump's tariffs take effect. Prince Rupert already moves the equivalent of 250,000 loaded rail cars yearly, and Manzanillo is poised to surpass Los Angeles in container traffic. A seamless rail and road link now connects them, free of U.S. customs oversight, offering both nations a clear return on investment. For Washington, every mile of this route acts as a pressure release. Rising tariffs push more freight to the corridor, starving Midwestern factories and dimming border warehouses. These trains follow schedules, not politics. The first double stack departs Prince Rupert at 6:40 tomorrow, before Congress even convenes. U.S. trade data underscores the stakes. In 2024, two-way goods trade with Canada hit $762.1 billion, and with Mexico, $839.9 billion, accounting for roughly a third of U.S. import spending. If just 10% of that trade shifts to the northern corridor, $160 billion in cargo bypasses U.S. rail yards and truck crossings, erasing customs fees and taxes that bolster federal coffers. In 2023, Customs and Border Protection collected $92.3 billion in duties and fees, second only to IRS revenue. Losing even a fraction of steel, EV batteries, or wheat shipments would sting. Factories feel the impact first. Midwest automakers would pay more for Canadian steel as supplies head to Mazatlan, and Gulf Coast chemical plants would face higher freight costs to access Mexican soda, ash via Houston instead of tariff-free Vancouver. Consumers will notice at retail, with a 1 to 2% drop in U.S. port volume potentially raising imported goods prices by 4 cents per dollar, per National Retail Federation estimates shared with the Senate in May. This precedes the 30% tariffs debut on August 1st. The Northern Corridor isn't just a route. It's a power shift, handing leverage to neighbors who've redrawn trade without U.S. approval. Washington's revenue system faces a challenge it can't control. On March 5th, a U.S. Customs Advisory meeting endorsed a North American single window, allowing Canada and Mexico to share trade data without U.S. servers, using a blockchain system that validates documents instantly, bypassing CBP entirely. This eliminates a revenue stream. CBP charges a minimum $32.71 per commercial entry, totaling $1.26 billion from 38.4 million entries in 2024. When shippers use the Canada-Mexico ledger, those fees vanish. Speed compounds the issue. A UN study shows single-window systems cut clearance times from 3 to 5 days to 24 hours. North America's pilot could shave 4 to 5 hours off shipments, outpacing congested U.S. crossings like Laredo and diverting high-value cargo from premium U.S. lanes. CBP's blockchain pilot already showed near-instant trader communication and eliminated redundant data entries, which U.S. border towns profit from. This ledger erases a billion-dollar revenue stream, speeds up freight, and leaves Washington negotiating with systems it doesn't control. Factories are already reeling. On April 14th, 2025, GM halted its Bright Drop electric van production in Ingersoll, Ontario, idling 1,200 workers, with 500 jobs potentially paused until a 2026 battery retool. One lost GM job triggers 7 more losses across supply chains, from welders to food vendors. The auto sector supports 83,860 factory jobs, 27,420 supply chain roles, and 291,280 Main Street positions, 500,000 livelihoods. Losing 1,000 assembly jobs could cut over 7,000 Midwestern paychecks. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation notes 10.1 million U.S. jobs, 5% of private sector employment, rely on the auto industry, with each factory job generating 9 more. If the Northern Corridor diverts EV battery production to Quebec, the losses accelerate. Unions are sounding alarms. On May 14th, the Longshore Union labeled Trump's tariffs an attack on workers after a 30% cargo drop at LA Long Beach. Dock workers fear freight shifting to Prince Rupert or Mazatlan may never return, weakening their leverage. UAW locals warn that each canceled production run erodes Detroit's supplier base. Capitol Hill is crunching numbers. Bright Drop's pause alone risks 9,000 jobs across the U.S. and Canada. Scale that to the corridor's rerouting of thousands of vehicles, and the Midwest faces a fiscal crisis. The question isn't whether tariffs disrupt boardrooms. It's whether Washington acts before steel mills, factories, and local diners collapse. A $120 billion trade artery just sidestepped U.S. customs. Mexico has joined Canada's northern corridor, turning a rail line into a continental workaround. This isn't a detour. It's a test of Trump's 30% tariff strategy. Stand firm, and Detroit risks assembling with dwindling supplies while customs posts see fewer trucks. Offer a last-minute tariff concession, and the losses might slow, but the message is clear. Infrastructure sets the rules. Will Washington rethink its approach, or will Canada and Mexico send the first train past U.S. borders? Share your predictions below. Your comments might shape tomorrow's news.